Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Good morning. As he said, my name is Chief Scott Howland with the California Highway Patrol, and I have responsibility for overseeing CHP's technology, including our communication centers. And I know the committee has several questions for us and really wants to understand kind of some data and statistics as far as what CHP's role is and also some processes. So I am going to dive into the weeds a little bit, but in that process, I think I'm going to address some of the questions you've already asked and hopefully some questions you haven't asked yet. I'll provide answers to for you. But to give just a little bit of background, as you remember when cell phones first came out, they were more like the size of a bag mounted in a phone, and the CHP was designated as the primary answering point for cell phones. At the time, they were mounted in cars. That was the only place you found them, and the only folks that needed help were those folks on the highways. And so when cell phones started, the CHP answered 100% of the mobile 911 calls. Fast forward to today, everybody's got a cell phone. We've talked about the statistics. We've talked about the fact that 75% of 911 calls are actually cell phones. But there's also been many changes of how we do business and how calls are routed in that time frame. And I want to talk about those a little bit. Of the 26 million calls in 2014, 17.9 were answered by CHP. Of those 7.6 million that CHP answered, 41% of the wireless calls were routed to CHP. The remaining 59% of wireless calls were routed directly to local public safety answering points. So we currently only answer a portion of all wireless 911 calls. Now, when you look at emergency response, it's truly a team effort. Law enforcement, firefighting, medical, and it really depends on the emergency of what combination needs to respond. And the real challenge is to make sure we have the right responders, get to the right location to provide that care when the public needs it. And as we're talking about it, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the amazing job that our dispatchers in the 451 public safety answering points across the state do on a daily basis, handling the millions of emergencies that come in and getting the help that they need. And I know from personal experience being a first responder myself, and I know from spending time at our dispatch centers, there's no one more frustrated when folks can't find a location. It's our dispatchers that are on the phone trying to get help to them that are the most concerned and most troubled by it because they want to get the help there. I want to spend a couple minutes talking about current call routing. And I think this is a process we spent a little time talking about this morning, and I hopefully can clarify some processes and also talk about some things that we've begun to do to help address some of those problems. So as we talked about earlier today, when you make a cell phone call, it goes to a cell tower. Now each tower has one or multiple sectors on it, and each of those sectors is routed differently or could be the same depending on where that tower is located and where those calls are coming from. But a couple important things to understand and remember as we're talking about this. Each sector can only be routed to one PSAP. Tower boundaries do not align with political boundaries, unfortunately. Many sectors cover multiple jurisdictional boundaries, and phones don't always connect to the closest tower. If you're on a hill, radio waves do interesting things. If a tower is busy, they do interesting things. And we found that even though the scientists map out where they think the calls are going to come from, they don't always come from where they think they're going to come from. And to help demonstrate this, I have a map, and I'm going to ask Richard to help walk through this. And so I actually have a map of a cell sector tower that's located in the city of Long Beach. And I want to walk through this to help understand some of our challenges, and then I'll talk about how we make some of our decisions. And so you can see the red dot in the middle is located within the city jurisdiction of Long Beach, and the primary answering point would be Long Beach Police Department. If you look at the lower left antenna, which is a triangular there, as you go down, you'll notice that there's a freeway, the 710 freeway. Those familiar with LA, you know how busy the 710 freeway is, cuts right through the middle of that sector. Now, if we move just beyond the freeway, we have a third jurisdiction, and that's the city of Carson. Carson is a contract city for the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. So within the mapped area of that antenna, we have three separate jurisdictions. Long Beach, very busy. 710 freeway, very busy. City of Carson, very busy. But we also notice that if you continue on down to the left, there's a pink sliver. That's Los Angeles Harbor Division. So now I have four jurisdictions that probably calls will go to that one cell sector. Our challenge with our current technology is I can only route all calls from that sector to one location. So the question is, how do we make the decision of where to route that call? Now, by default, in the past, it's always been to the CHP because we had a freeway going through the middle of it. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that that goes to the PSAP that would provide the least number of transfers. And so as an example, if 90% of the calls were out of the city of Long Beach, it would be reduce the number of transfers to route that to the city of Long Beach. Now, recognizing that there'll be calls from that freeway, there'll be calls from Carson, there may even be calls from Los Angeles, those would have to be transfers. But when we look at our sectors, it's really important to make sure that we have the least number of transfers so that we can get the help to people as quickly as possible and transfer as few callers as necessary. And the unfortunate part is we can't route any other way. We only can route to one location. When we talk about this topic, the other thing that comes up a lot of times is the term misroutes. And when we look at cell sectors, misroutes are actually when a sector is supposed to go to one PSAP and the carrier is routing it to a different PSAP. That is a misroute. And in many cases, in this example, if that cell sector is routed to the city of Long Beach and a call comes in from the city of Carson, that call is routed to the city of Long Beach. That is not a misroute. That is how that sector is routed. And I think it goes to the basis of one of your questions, Assemblymember Williams, of how do we make sure that we have the least amount of transfers so that if we have a small percentage of calls from the city of Long Beach and the majority of calls from the 710 freeway, that would come to the CHP, or if it's vice versa, that it would go to Long Beach. So in the past, our most effective way of doing that was looking at each cell sector. And the challenge is each provider has their own towers. Each tower has multiple sectors. So the exercise is really a provider by provider, tower by tower, sector by sector analysis. But to put it in perspective, California has approximately 278,000 sectors. That's a lot of sectors. And even if you could review a lot of sectors in a month, it would take a long time to get there. And the previous RED project was discussed earlier, and that project over a several-year period looked at just a percentage of cell towers in California. And so I think the real challenge is how do we use technology to look at our sectors in order to identify those that need to be routed?
I think Assemblymember Williams has a question on that.
So with that and with this diagram, I think it's important to clarify something. I'm not even talking about ones where it's tough to make a call. Right? I'm talking about anywhere in downtown Santa Barbara, including in front of the police department or in front of a fire station. If you call 911, you will get CHP dispatch in Ventura. You think the majority of the phone calls that are made to 911 are accident related or are related to incidences in a downtown of a city of 100,000 people, right? Or let me just give you another one. Stork Tower. It serves Isla Vista, a community of 24,000, mostly college students, and UCSB. There is not a freeway within 3/4 of a mile. You think the majority of phone calls are destined for a CHP or for Santa Barbara County sheriffs. Those are kind of the ones that pop out at you. And many of my constituents in Ventura County, there are areas were optimized through the RED project. I get much fewer complaints down there because, frankly, there is better routing, or at least anecdotally less transfers, than in Santa Barbara County. And so what I'm asking is, if we have a method that works, i.e. the RED project, and we have afforded a percentage of the people of the state of California greater safety because of it, because of fewer transfers, why can't the rest of the people of California be afforded that same safety? And if, as you say, we can't do it fast enough, why are we not trying to do any of it?
Well, the good news is I have a process that we are beginning that actually addresses that issue. So as you're probably familiar, the ECAT system is the data that comes from all our PSAPs across the state. And that ECAT system provides each public safety answering point the ability to pull data. The State 911 office has been working with ECATs, the service provider, to develop some additional reports. Those new reports are currently in test. What those reports do is they allow us to, at a granular level, run a report that says, identify cell towers that have a transfer rate above 75%, above 60%, above 50%, which would mean we probably need to pay some attention to those towers to figure out, are they being routed to the wrong PSAP so that we can move those PSAPs to the right jurisdiction. So in preparation for today, I asked my staff to run that report, even though it's under test. We have not confirmed that it's 100% accurate, but we are as anxious as you to make sure that PSAPs are routed so the majority of calls get to the right public safety answering point. And the best way to do that is based on data, as you know, to look at the data to figure out how many calls should go to Santa Barbara PD, how many calls go to CHP, and figure out where do the majority of calls for service go and make sure it goes to that provider. They ran the report for Ventura Communication Center, which we dispatch our personnel out of our Ventura office and the south half of Santa Barbara County, so our folks that work within Santa Barbara, Goleta, that area. That report flagged 2 towers for us. One tower was 68%, the other tower, 63%, the other tower was 83%. My staff is diving into that data. They're going to be working closely with the county coordinator, and if I'm just going to take a guess, it's going to show that those transfers need to go to a different PSAP in Santa Barbara. We're going to start that process and get those towers moved.
I really appreciate that, because I do sincerely believe that your point about reducing transfers is spot on. That's really what it's about. And when I talk to officers on the street, no matter what color uniform they have, whether it's the CHP's beige or whether it's PD's black or whether it's the deputy sheriff's green, or whether they wear a fire hat or a white ER uniform, what alarms them the most is that they base their response times based on when the call is routed to them or when it's transferred to them. And so all these communities look at response times in a way that doesn't include the amount of time that may have happened before the transfer. So that means the response times for most of the state is totally inaccurate. And most public safety personnel don't know how quickly they're actually getting there. And that freaks them out, regardless what color uniform they have. And my hope is not just that we get a couple towers in Santa Barbara because I'm the squeaky wheel, but that 83% of the state that hasn't been optimized, that we can optimize that.
And here's the beauty of these new reportings. We can run them based on all the sectors that are assigned to CHP, and we have started the process to do that. But it's not a one-time snapshot. So my plan is to monthly to take another look at it, so that as things change, we can adjust as they go, that we're not satisfied with status quo, that we want to make sure that we do it. Now, when we look at it, what do we look at? So we're going to run the stats. We're going to have a better way to automate and flag those sectors so that we can really evaluate them. But we have a process we have to go through. The law requires that we look at calls originating off the freeway, that alternate routing is available. There's some other place we can route it. Alternate routing is a benefit to public safety, and when we're talking large percentages of transfers, I think that's a pretty easy case to make. And finally, that the CHP and the public safety answering point that it's going to be transferred to agree that it's in the best interest of public safety. Now, even with that criteria, we have some challenges. And those challenges that not all jurisdictions are taking calls. Assemblymember Cooper had asked that question. We have a number of jurisdictions that aren't taking calls. We also have some jurisdictions that only want towers that are 100% theirs. So if 95% of the calls are there and 5% are ours, they don't want to take them. We have some jurisdictions that are only taking some sectors, and we have some jurisdictions that are only taking some providers. So when you look at the big picture, if we could get them to take their sectors, it would benefit everybody. And the challenge is those that aren't taking theirs leaves the CHP answering those calls. I had a discussion with the Commissioner just the other day. He says, I don't want to screen calls for other people. We want to make sure those calls get to the folks that are going to provide the service because it's in the best interest of the public. We need to make sure those calls are routed to the folks who are going to be handling them because we don't want to slow down the process. On the reverse side, if 95% of the calls we are providing the direct service, it's in the public best interest for us to continue to take those calls because seconds count on the freeway. When you're in a life-threatening situation, stuck in a traffic lane, we need to get our folks there as quickly as possible. And again, we want to make sure using our current system that we route appropriately so that we can minimize the number of call transfers. I'm really excited about these new reports because it's giving us the ability to do things that we have not been able to do in the past. And in the past, it's been taking years to get things done, even a small percentage. We can quickly run reports, identify towers we need to look at, and start the process. And I'm very proud of my staff because they've looked at a couple reports and they're starting that process. Even though we're not done testing this system, we're saying, hey, we have some information, we're going to jump on it and act on it because it's in the best interest of the public. I think the other challenge that we end up getting is that sometimes we're not aware of new towers that are coming online. And we want to make sure we have the opportunity to look at the historical data that we know so that it can be routed to the right place initially so that we don't have to wait till it gets to the point it gets flagged. Because it makes sense that if we're going to be serving something smack in the middle of the city of Long Beach or smack in the city of Santa Barbara, that the calls for service based on history that we do know are going to be the cities. We want to route it to the city. We don't want to delay it from that standpoint. I think the other thing is sometimes implementing changes with those sectors can cause delays, and it takes time for those changes to be made. We want to be able to have those changes made quickly once we've identified it so the public can benefit from those changes. And I think the other thing, seeing we've been talking about location information is such important data for us. And we've talked earlier, even when we know the tower location, we don't know if it's even the call's coming from within what we think is the tower boundaries. It could be coming from a different location. And really getting the phone companies to do that. As you heard Karen talk about, 63% of our calls did have phase 2 information. And that does help us because then we spend less time verifying the location that we can get emergency personnel responding, whether it's our jurisdiction or another jurisdiction, and that's key to do. And it was interesting when I was listening to the FCC requirements of 30 seconds to provide that location. Seconds count.
Yes, they do.
And if I were to pause for 30 seconds right now, it would be a really long time. I'm not going to do that because I know we're a little crunched on time. But I know as a responder, you appreciate how long 30 seconds is and getting that location information earlier. The thing about the FCC requirements, they're minimum standards. And I would challenge the providers to exceed those standards so that we have location information from the get-go and not be delayed in getting those. In closing, I just want to say the CHP is committed to maximizing our 911 system to ensure the best emergency response to the public possible. Like I said, I'm excited about the new tools that we have, and we're going to try and use those tools to the maximum to identify towers that we need to change. We're also going to work with the 911 committee looking at additional technology that we can utilize to maximize our current system to ensure calls are routed and transfers are reduced. We realize seconds count in an emergency, and when the public dials 911, we want to ensure that the help they need arrives as quickly as possible and to the right location. Thank you. And I'll address any questions you have.
No, thank you, Scott. You know, you hit it right on the nail when you said 30 seconds of pause. Just think about anybody in this room try to hold their breath for 1 minute. Nobody can do that. You know, so those minutes, seconds are crucial. And once again, I could talk about my experience in the ambulance industry. You know, and getting to those emergencies as quickly as possible. And sometimes it kind of irks us where we still work, and when the dispatcher tells us the report came in through a cell phone via 911. So it's like, that's like, okay, this is going to make this more challenging because now we got to really do other things. Or we got to search these people out because they'll try to call back and now they're not answering. So now what do we do? But yeah, you know, I think the purpose of this, we're all hearing this testimony, how we can all work together to implement these policy and procedures sooner, not later. But obviously, funding is going to be a major key.
Absolutely. And your point that it's a team effort in both responding and addressing this issue is how we'll have success.
And and it comes about having meetings like this to see the issue and how we can work together to make it better. Thank you. Very appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.